I don't remember the last time I felt like family. I remember gatherings, yes, barbecues in Uncle Marty's backyard, plastic folding chairs that always pinched your thighs, the overpowering scent of overly chlorinated pool water, and Aunt Karen's perfume that clung to your clothes longer than any memory. I remember being there, but I don't recall belonging. It started young. I was the quiet one, the odd one. The mistake perhaps not because anyone said it directly, but because they never had to. There's a kind of silence in a family that's louder than screaming, and mine mastered it. I would sit at the far end of the table next to the guest bathroom door while my cousins laughed over inside jokes and shared glances that excluded me with surgical precision. I suppose it wasn't one event that made me feel like an outsider. It was 1,000 little things, missed invitations, birthday cards signed from all of us with no handwriting cousins who couldn't remember if I was still in school or already graduated. A gradual erosion of presence until I began to doubt I was ever truly there to begin with. My mother tried in her own fragile way. She'd pat my hand, sometimes say things like, "They just don't know you." But I think that's what hurt more, because even she had settled for not explaining me. She stood in the gap between me and the family, not as a bridge, but as a wall of indifference. Dad was charisma in golf shorts. He knew everyone's secrets but never mine. Because he never asked. I think he saw my quiet as defiance. Maybe he was right. At school, I worked hard. It wasn't to impress them. I had long stopped trying. I needed something that made me feel solid, real. Numbers were reliable. So I learned to love accounting finance and eventually the subtle art of leverage. While they were busy making passive-aggressive Facebook comments and planning the next potluck, I was mapping out my escape. Not out of spite. At least, not then. I just wanted distance, and if I could convert emotional exile into financial freedom, all the better. College wasn't a celebration. They didn't throw a party. They didn't even come to orientation. "It's just community college," someone muttered at that year's family reunion. Someone else said, "Well, at least she's doing something." They'd forgotten I got in with a full scholarship. I remember the reunion vividly. It was at a coastal resort, one of those places with overpriced appetizers and too much white furniture. They didn't invite me directly. My cousin Brandon let it slip on Instagram. So I went. Not because I wanted to be there, but because I needed to see for the last time what I wasn't part of. I arrived in a rental car dressed simply. Nobody greeted me. Nobody asked why I hadn't RSVP'd. They just blinked past me, like a misplaced shadow. Then as I stood near the buffet table balancing a drink, I didn't want I heard my Aunt Melanie say it. "She doesn't belong here." Honestly, I don't know why she even showed up. Another aunt laughed. "Let her linger. Maybe she'll find her way back to whatever hole she crawled out of." And I nodded quietly to myself. They were right. I didn't belong there. Not in that room, not in their fragile ecosystem of denial and curated affection. That was the moment, the pivot. It wasn't anger that stirred inside me. It was certainty. Cold, clean certainty. The kind that doesn't shake or weep. It just hardens, solidifies. I would never again ask for a seat at their table. I would build the table and decide who sat at it. I didn't know then that it would take years, that I'd bleed for it, that the cost of reinvention would be loneliness so sharp it scraped marrow. But I would make it. I would become the person they'd never forget, not because I screamed or begged or broke, but because I would own the ground they stood on. And when they gathered again, the list would be different. After that reunion, I didn't go back to see them. No holidays, no texts, no likes or comments on their filtered online lives. I became a ghost with a pulse. And for the first time, I found clarity in absence. I left the suburbs behind and moved into a tiny studio in a city that didn't know my name. I worked 2 jobs while taking night classes, finance and real estate during the day, bartending in the evenings. On paper, it looked like I was surviving. In truth, I was building. Quietly, efficiently. like someone who had spent their whole life being underestimated and now understood the advantage of being overlooked. I'd wake up at 5 a.m., study economic models while eating toast, and write out goals with the kind of obsession people usually reserve for revenge letters or love songs. I didn't post about it. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Because I knew in my bones that success is silent until it isn't. In those early years, I'd sometimes hear about the family through secondhand gossip. My sister Amelia got married in a 6-figure wedding funded by my father. They sent engraved invitations to everyone except me. My cousin opened a failed candle business and somehow still got a congratulatory party. Uncle Marty sold his house and moved to Florida for a new start that everyone toasted like it was heroism. No one ever asked where I was. No one knew that I had just bought my first property, a triplex, ugly as sin on the outside but structurally solid. I lived in one unit, rented the other 2. It was my first taste of leverage, and I was addicted. I reinvested everything I made. No vacations, no new clothes, just asset after asset like stacking bricks in a wall they couldn't climb. But bitterness has a long memory. One year, in a moment of weakness or nostalgia, I sent my parents a Christmas card. It was simple. No glitter, no photos, just a short message, "I'm doing okay. Hope you are too." They never replied, but I later saw a Facebook post my mother shared. Grateful for the real family we have around us this season. Some people choose to be distant. I stared at that line for a long time. Then I deleted her number. I think that was when my path narrowed into something sharper. This wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about taking control of the narrative. They said I didn't belong. Fine. Let them live in the world they built of favoritism, denial, and parties that masked guilt with champagne. I would build another world from scratch, brick by brutal brick. And one day, our paths would cross again. Not because I asked for it, but because I would become too big to ignore. So I kept building. By 28, I owned a portfolio of short-term rental homes in prime resort locations. I'd studied hospitality contracts marketing. My name wasn't famous, but it was on the documents that mattered. The names of the holding companies were cold and faceless. Delve Properties, Omniscape Holdings, but they all traced back to me. And one day, a familiar name popped up in an acquisition deal. A family resort recently underperforming listed for sale. It was the same resort where they had hosted the family reunion. At first I laughed. Then I sat with it for a long, long time. It felt too symbolic, too poetic. But sometimes the universe opens a door and you either walk through it or regret it for the rest of your life. So I bought it. Quietly, anonymously, through shell companies and silence. I didn't need credit. I needed control. Once the ink dried, I sat in the resort's penthouse suite, the same one where my aunt had once made a toast about how family is everything. I poured a glass of wine. Let the bitterness coat my throat like medicine. Then I picked up my phone, because it was time to write a guest list of my own. Before the guest list was written, before the invitations were designed and sent, I had to sit with myself, with all of it. Owning the resort didn't erase the years I spent swallowing silence like a second skin. It didn't undo the ache of every empty Christmas morning, or the sick feeling in my stomach when a stranger said, "You must be really close with your family," and I had to smile and change the subject. Because the truth is, no matter how far you run, grief follows. I remember one night, maybe 6 months before I bought the resort, I was driving home from a site inspection in the rain. The roads were slick, the headlights blurry, and I was so tired I could barely keep my hands steady on the wheel. A playlist I hadn't heard in years came on some old acoustic track from my childhood, and suddenly, I was back in my old bedroom staring at the ceiling while laughter drifted up from downstairs. They were watching a movie. I wasn't invited. I had gotten a C in algebra. My father said I was too disappointing to be around. That night in the car, I pulled over to the shoulder and cried. Not because I missed them, but because I missed what could have been. The version of childhood I never got. The birthday cakes, the matching pajamas, the sense of belonging. That was my rock bottom. Not financial, not physical, emotional. I realized I'd built an empire out of rejection, that every property deed was a shield, every investment a layer of armor. And while that made me powerful, it also made me hollow. Because revenge, no matter how carefully served, does not restore love. And I had to decide before I made my move whether I wanted restoration or retribution. I chose clarity. That clarity told me that they weren't capable of change. That the same people who once looked me in the eye and told me I was too much or not enough would never apologize, never reflect, never arrive at the emotional maturity I'd hoped they might. But I could. So I went to therapy. I sat across from a woman with kind eyes and too many notepads, and I told her everything. About the family, the reunion, the way they laughed when I brought up the idea of starting a business. About how my mother once said, "It's not that we don't love you, we just love your sister more openly." She wrote something on her pad. I never asked what it was. But in those sessions, I found something I didn't expect: peace. Not the kind of peace that's soft and warm and hugs you like a blanket. No. This peace was cold, steel-lined. It said, "They don't define you anymore." And when I felt that peace root into my ribs, I knew I was ready. So I hired the best team I could find, an elite hospitality management group who'd handled celebrity weddings, discreet billionaire getaways, and corporate summits for brands you see in Super Bowl ads. I told them I wanted an invitation-only black-tie family celebration weekend at the resort. 5-star menus, white glove service, every guest vetted. When they asked about the occasion, I smiled and said, "Let's just call it a homecoming." The date I chose, 1 year exactly to the day of that infamous family reunion. They didn't know yet, but they would. The first invitation went out to someone I hadn't spoken to in years, my grandmother's sister, Aunt Riva. A sharp-tongued, no-nonsense woman who'd always had more warmth for me than the rest of the family combined. She lived 3 states away now, in a little house with wind chimes and 3 rescue cats. When she received the envelope, heavy cardstock handwritten calligraphy gold leaf trim, she called me instantly. "Is this real?" she asked. "Are you really hosting this at the Harwood estate?" "Yes," I said. "I own it now." There was a long pause followed by a crack in her voice. "Well, it's about time someone turned that place into something worthy." I hung up, heart hammering. That was the moment it all turned real. More invites followed. Old teachers, a former mentor, my first real friend Malik, who had once stayed up with me all night when I was convinced I had no future. The people who had really seen me through the blur of rejection. I didn't invite my family. Not yet. I waited. Because the guest list wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming identity. Building a circle from the ashes of exclusion. These people were my chosen family, those who had held space for me when others wouldn't. Behind the scenes, my team transformed the resort into a haven of intentional design. The entrance was lined with framed photos from my life moments of quiet victory, my first property signing my MBA graduation, the launch of my foundation. There was a gallery wall titled The Unseen Years, an exhibit of childhood drawings, report cards, even a journal entry I'd once scribbled on a napkin at a diner. It read, "One day they'll remember I was here." I didn't know back then how prophetic that line would become. And still, I hadn't told my family. Until one morning 2 weeks before the event, I received a call from my cousin Drew. "Hey," he said cautiously. "I heard a rumor that you're throwing some kind of thing at Harwood." I kept my voice level. "It's a private gathering." "Well, the family's planning a brunch reunion that same weekend at Harwood. They've already booked rooms." They didn't. There was silence on the other end. "Wait, what?" "I bought the estate, Drew. I own Harwood now." Another silence. This one stretched out like a snapped wire. "You're kidding." "I'm not." He exhaled long and slow. "You know they're gonna lose their minds." I smiled. They already lost their chance. That was the turning point, not just emotionally, but symbolically. For the first time in my life, I held the seat at the head of the table. Not because it was handed to me, but because I built it screw by screw, deal by deal, sleepless night by sleepless night. And now the same people who told me I didn't belong were about to find out just how far I'd come. I could have stopped there. Let them show up to locked gates and security guards with clipboards. But that wasn't enough. This wasn't about punishment. It was about declaration. So I sent out one final envelope. A thick ivory folder addressed to my parents, embossed elegant, unmistakable. Inside was a single card, no event details, no RSVP. Just one sentence. You were right, I don't belong. That's why the guest list has changed. I never heard back, but I knew they got it. Because a week later, my sister posted a photo on social media of a backyard BBQ labeled Family Forever. No mention of me. No tag. Just a circle drawn tighter in panic. Let them cling. I wasn't circling back. I was moving forward with every step, every detail, every name on the guest list. A testament to what happens when the black sheep turns shepherd. Revenge. It's a word that makes people think of fire, of shouting chaos and ruined reputations. But mine didn't come with smoke. Mine came dressed in linen, set beneath chandeliers, and timed to the second. It started the morning of the reunion weekend. Guests began arriving at Harwood in sleek black cars with chilled water bottles in their cup holders and personalized welcome kits on the leather seats. Each envelope bore their name in gold foil. Inside a map of the estate, a program of events, and a note that simply read, "You were chosen not by blood, but by bond." The front lawn was transformed into a garden brunch. String quartet playing something soft but triumphant. Long white tables under ivy-wrapped pergolas. No loud voices, no performative laughter. Just a quiet hum of people who had once been strangers, now united by their presence in my chapter. That was phase 1. Phase 2 began at 11:30 a.m., the exact time my family had planned their so-called reunion brunch elsewhere in town. Unbeknownst to them, the Harwood estate had taken out a full-page ad in the local lifestyle magazine that week. Front cover a photo of the newly renovated mansion. Inside a 2-page spread about the rise of a visionary, the owner who reclaimed his place. They saw it. Of course they did. My cousin texted me a screenshot, "Bro, this is savage." My response, a thumbs up emoji. But that wasn't the final move. No, I saved that for the afternoon. At 3 p.m. sharp, as the sun filtered through the glass of Harwood's grand ballroom, we gathered for what I had named the restoration ceremony. It wasn't a wedding. It wasn't an award show. It was something stranger and more beautiful. Each guest was handed a sealed envelope and led into the ballroom walls draped in midnight blue velvet ceiling, lit by hundreds of warm bulbs like stars drawn down from the sky. At the front stood a podium. I took the stage. No introduction. Just a breath, and then there was a time I believed I had to earn my way into love. That if I achieved enough, I'd finally be welcomed back into a family that never held space for me. But the truth is, you can't return to a place that never saw you. So, I built a new place instead. I paused. This estate, this gathering, this moment, it isn't about exclusion. It's about restoration, of identity, of voice, of worth. I gestured to the envelopes. Inside each is a piece of that worth, something you gave to me knowingly or not. Support, kindness, a reminder I mattered when I was told I didn't. This is your seat at the table, forever. When I stepped down, the room was silent, moved, seen. But I wasn't done. One last thing. At the closing reception, I unveiled the nameplate mounted outside the estate gates. It read, Harwood Legacy Center, established 2024 in honor of the forgotten. I didn't name it after myself. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I named it after all of us, the misfits, the invisible ones, the people who weren't invited but came anyway. Later that evening, someone told me they overheard my father and sister driving up to the gates, unaware they'd be turned away by security. They never made it past the front. Good. They didn't belong. Not because I said so, but because they had said it first. And this time, I simply agreed. I wasn't supposed to be watching from the balcony, But something about that height, the quiet observation above the scene I had so carefully constructed, gave me the distance I needed to feel nothing. Below, guests floated in soft laughter across the candlelit courtyard. Waiters passed hors d'oeuvres on polished trays. A jazz trio played something subtle, reverent. The scent of rosemary and charred orange wafted from the outdoor kitchen. It was perfect. And then I saw the black SUV pull up outside the main entrance, not the VIP entrance, not the valet loop. Just the main gate where the security guard stood with earpieces and a firm list of who was allowed on the property. I didn't need to ask who it was. I knew. My sister stepped out first. She was still thin, still sharp, her heels clicking like old habits on the stone. My father followed slightly hunched, a mix of irritation and confusion on his face. My mother, in some shimmering pale dress, hung back near the door, as if unsure whether to fully commit to entering a place she once insisted I would never reach. They didn't make it past the security checkpoint. There was no shouting, no drama, just a polite shake of the head from my lead security officer, and then the instant when realization bloomed on my sister's face. She wasn't on the guest list, and for the first time in her life, she couldn't talk her way in. I watched as my father pulled out his phone, dialed, waited, then again. His posture grew stiffer with every unanswered call. I had muted all their numbers weeks ago. Eventually, the three of them stood there, eyes turned toward the house, toward me. I realized once they caught my silhouette on the balcony. I didn't hide. I didn't wave either. I just stood framed by amber light and brushed glass overlooking the life I had built and the people who no longer had access to it. I met my sister's eyes. It wasn't anger in hers. It wasn't guilt. It was confusion, as if she couldn't fathom that I had outgrown her, that I no longer needed an invitation to belong. The courtyard grew quieter, as if the energy had shifted. Guests noticed the distant figures behind the gate. Some asked questions. Others simply turned back to their wine. And I simply turned around, walked inside, and let the door close behind me. No words, no closure, just silence. And in that silence, a thunderous knowing that the final confrontation didn't need to be a fight. It only needed to be undeniable. Days passed. The event was over, decorations stored away the estate quiet again. But the memory lingered, the bittersweet flavor of victory intertwined with something heavier, more solemn. Justice, I discovered, isn't like the movies. It doesn't always taste sweet, and it doesn't always feel warm. It just feels finished. Final. Done. My phone buzzed endlessly. Calls from my father, voicemails from my mother, texts from my sister, a spectrum of reactions from furious to pleading. I answered none of them. This silence was not punishment. It was boundary, a line drawn firm in ink that would never fade. Eventually, the messages stopped, and life resumed. The Harwood Legacy Center flourished. The reputation grew, the calendar filled. Soon, weddings and charity galas, workshops and retreats painted new memories over the ghosts of old ones. Each event felt like another small stitch closing a wound. Yet the cost was undeniable. I was free, but alone. Justice meant severing ties that, despite their toxicity, had once defined me. In the quiet evenings, walking alone through the gardens, I'd feel echoes of a childhood I never fully knew. I understood now revenge doesn't repair damage. It merely cauterizes the wound. Then one evening, I found myself in a room I hadn't entered since the event. A small office at the back of the estate. It was quiet shadows from the setting sun stretching across the floor. On the desk sat a sealed envelope I'd left untouched. One final letter from my mother slipped under the door during the aftermath. I opened it slowly, reading the delicate script I'd once seen on birthday cards and holiday notes. I don't know how to say this, or if you'll ever read it, but I'm sorry. Sorry for not protecting you. Sorry for letting you believe you were anything less than extraordinary. If you ever decide to talk, I'm here. No expectations. Just hope. I folded the letter carefully, my heart heavy, but not hurting. I understood something vital: forgiveness might never happen. Reconciliation might never be possible. But peace didn't require either. Justice was not revenge, nor was revenge justice. Justice was the choice to no longer be defined by the wounds they caused. And as I tucked that letter away, something inside me released. I no longer needed their acknowledgement. I no longer sought their validation. The consequence was freedom, the true and total freedom of being whole without them. The first time I walked the Harwood grounds after the storm passed, I felt a tremor of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years' peace. It wasn't the triumphant kind you see in movies with dramatic music and applause. It was quieter, like the hush after a long downpour when the world smells clean and possibilities glint in puddles. I paused on the terrace, staring out at the rolling gardens and the distant lights of the town, and took a deep, steadying breath. For so long, I had defined myself by what I lacked a place at their table, a place in their hearts. Then, I had turned that emptiness into purpose-stacking assets like building blocks until I towered above their narrow expectations. I had staged a public reckoning. I had drawn lines they could not cross. But in the aftermath, I realized the more important stage was this one here in the quiet glow of twilight, rebuilding from the inside out. I walked slowly along the cobblestone path where once guests had mingled in tuxedos and gowns. Now the path was mine alone. The hedges were neatly trimmed, but a few stray petals lay scattered reminders that life resists even the neatest plans. I picked up one pale pink bloom and held it soft and delicate, yet alive. It reminded me that in life's fiercest moments, we can still find beauty. Under the arched trellis, where the string quartet had once played, I sat on the wrought iron bench. One of the caregivers from the local hospice, whom I'd invited as a guest in gratitude for their kindness to Grandma, had inscribed a simple poem on a stone tile. Where love grows, wounds find home. I traced the words with a finger, letting them sink in. Love, I realized, wasn't something they could withhold from me. I carried it in my heart and cultivated it with the people who truly saw me. That night, I lit a single lantern and released it over the koi pond where Grandma's initials had once been carved on the stone edge. The paper lantern glowed like a captive star, carrying my unspoken gratitude into the sky. For Grandma, for Aunt Reva, for Malik, for the strangers turned friends who believed in me when I struggled to believe in myself. For the dark times that schooled me. And yes, even for the family who taught me the price of exclusion. Tomorrow, I would break ground on the new community hall, a place where people who felt as invisible as I once did could gather, be seen, and held. I would invest in scholarships for first-generation students so that they might too find their path unblocked. I would host grief workshops and healing circles, turning a story of vengeance into one of community. Because vengeance ends with an exhale, but justice can spark a century of compassion. If you've stayed with me this long, thank you. I shared my wounds and my victories because we all carry scars, some visible and many hidden. If you've ever been told you don't belong or watched someone you love exclude, you know that you are not alone. You have the power to reclaim your story. You can build your own table, your own community, your own legacy. It may cost you comfort, maybe even forgiveness, but it grants freedom, the freedom to be yourself. Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been written out of someone's story only to rewrite it yourself? What's one act of quiet strength you've carried out in your own life? Share your experience in the comments below. Let's create a space of understanding and solidarity. If this story resonated with you, please hit like and consider sharing it with someone who needs to hear that they belong wherever they choose to stand. And if you want more cinematic tales of silent revenge and profound justice, subscribe to Silent Revenge and ring the bell. Because the world needs to know sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin in the quietest hearts. Thank you for listening. Stay strong, stay true, And never let anyone write your chapter without your permission.